When did you become aware of the Muslim grooming gangs? And when you became aware, were you following someone who was broadcasting it, or were you just finding out from first-hand experience?
So when I was 12, I had a cousin, it's actually my mum's cousin, who was found naked running through the streets, 13 years old. When she woke up, she was in a flat in Bury Park in Luton with lots of bearded Muslim men who were raping her. Now, she was actually taken by the prostitutes. The prostitutes found her, they rang her dad. Her dad went and got her. The family rang the police. I remember all of these conversations happening. The family rang the police. The police did nothing. And now everyone understands this. They did nothing. Do you know what the police said? She's a drug addict. Yeah, she was. Because she'd been groomed and she'd been put on drugs and she was addicted to drugs. And in the end, her family would lock her in the house and lock her in there. She'd climb out the window to go back to them. Yeah, to get raped, to get drugs. And she was a child. So, and do you know how many beautiful girls I know who grew up in my town that are gone? They're gone. And I'll give another one example of that. Stacey Dooley is from Luton. She just won Dancing on Ice, is it? I grew up with Stacey. Stacey come back to Luton to do a documentary. Many of you would have seen it. When she sat down with me, she said, "What's happening?" She left Luton. She's been very successful. Well done to her. But when she come back, I said, "Well, Stacey," she said, "What's happened?" I said, "You know your ex-boyfriend?" She's come out recently, actually, talking about her upbringing, how she escaped the ghetto. I said, "Stacey, you know your ex-boyfriend?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, he's now a radical Muslim. He converted in prison. You know your best friend when you was here?" And Stacey done all the drama and all that sort of stuff as a youngster. And so did her best friend. Beautiful girl. Absolutely beautiful girl. In fact, I saw her best friend's mum one New Year's Eve, and she was just crying her eyes out. And I said, "We're supposed to just tolerate this." I said, "You need to go and speak to your best friend's mum and ask where their daughter is, when the last time they saw their daughter. And then tell that story, because that's the real story. The real story of girls within our community being taken from their families, groomed, prostituted, beaten, raped. And meanwhile, and do you know what? And I spoke about this for years, and do you know what's just happened in the last 4 months, which hasn't hit any publicity yet? 26 Muslim men have been arrested for historic grooming offences in Luton at Wardown Park. An issue, and this is the thing that, so I spoke about this, and I didn't just speak about it, so you understand, so people can understand the depths of, do you know, I'll give one example. When you saw trouble on the streets at English Defence League rallies, there was trouble at those protests. I went and spent a night with a family in Blackburn, and I heard the horrific stories of what was happening to their 11 and 12-year-old daughter. And their brother was there, and he was probably 17, 18. And I sat and heard about all these horrific stories of the rapes of their daughter. And how the police, again, had done nothing. When we had the demonstration the next day, and there was a lot of trouble, and I've always gone down to try and calm our supporters down. Who's at the front of that demonstration going absolutely insane? That young girl's brother. Who am I to even, when you've got those failures, and do you know the most disgusting thing? I remember sitting in prison. When the Rotherham scandal broke, I was sat in prison, HMP Winchester. And I sat there and watched. And I see a girl, and I know that girl. And she went to Rotherham to protest outside Sean Wright, who was in charge of the police there because he was refusing to resign. So the English Defence League were then protesting. And I looked and I saw a girl, and she's from Birmingham, and I know her. And I know what's happened to her growing up. I know her history. She's a complete victim of gangs of men who have abused and raped her and tortured her. And then I watched as the snotty-nosed journalist looked down his nose upon her and labelled her as a far-right protester and an extremist. She's not an extremist, she's a victim. So I know I get so, when you've met the families I've met and heard the stories I've heard, another one, a young girl from Blackpool, and her father, and do you know what, it's actually got quite a nice ending, this one. Her father, I went to meet with him, his daughter's gone, they've took his daughter, took her for, and once the girl gets 16, 17, once they get to 16, 17, the police aren't interested, they're not helping, they're still victims, they've been groomed. They take, when your family kick up too much of a fuss, this is just simple process that they do in every town. They move her. So she'll be taken from Blackpool, she was taken to Oldham. She's then in Oldham. The Muslim man that used to rape that girl would ring the girl's dad and leave the phone on the side. And he'd be crying, telling me, whilst he's having to listen, and not just the Muslim, the young Muslim who's raping her, he's raping her with his own dad. This is the crimes that are happening. So he has to listen. And he was and I've spent years then. I kept in contact with him, and in fact, I got a phone call from him probably 2 years ago, 18 months ago, crying. I'm probably gonna well up even talking about it.
It's okay. Carry on. Johnson Ward.
No, to say that his daughter was home, that his daughter would come back.
Tommy, no wonder you're upset with the stories you're describing. But it's important here that we show the truth.
It's infuriating, that's what it is. It's infuriating to see the way, do you know when you saw Jack Straw talk about it? He's talking about them like they're statistics. They're daughters, man. They're sisters. And they're our daughters and our sisters. And you act, and you betray us, or the people talking about it. And then, do you know Rotherham? Do you know after the Rotherham scandal broke? Do you know grants were given, I think £128,000 to fight Islamophobia in Rotherham? Do you know there's still 40 victims waiting on a waiting list for counselling in that town? There's still 40 young girls who are waiting. Do you know a girl died 4 weeks ago from a drug overdose? Yeah, she's 30. She died of a drug overdose. That's the knock-on from the grooming. Do you know the people in authority in that town who let it happen? All the people in those councils that let it happen, the police forces that let it happen, and the government have accepted that they let it happen. And still the money and the support has not been given to help those victims. Instead, the money's been ploughed and thrown into the Islamic community to protect them from mean words on Twitter. When you put it all out there, it's absolutely how this country's, even how every man in this country is letting this happen or let it happen. And it's still happening. And that's, so the grooming, when you understand the level of abuse, of torture, and this isn't just rape, this isn't about men satisfying their sexual needs. This is about raping girls with broken bottles, sticking claw hammers up children. This is about torture, setting fire to their genitals. That's what this is about. Nailing their tongues to tables. It's not sexual gratification. That's the destruction of our daughters. Religiously motivated destruction of our daughters. And it's not, and we're supposed to just, Rotherham, so you can understand the size of the problem. Rotherham has a Muslim population of 10,000 people. Out of that 10,000 people, 2,800 fit the age criteria of men that could be involved in grooming, i.e. 15 up to 60. 2,800. Do you know how many of those men are under current investigation by the police in Rotherham? 550. 20% of the Muslim men in that town are under investigation. You're not talking about one or two. And what you're talking about for the first time, in this country anyway, for the first time is these rapes are brothers, cousins, brother-in-laws, fathers and sons, work colleagues. It's that accepted within that community. Why? And when you try and draw these, to prevent anything, you have to understand it. You have to be able to talk about it to prevent it. You have to understand it. And to understand it, we have to understand why. I have a population of, and this is where it gets dark. Rotherham, 3%, 4% of Rotherham is Muslim. 1,400 victims. Telford, one of the other famous grooming towns, 1,000 victims, 2 dead, set on fire, murdered. 1% of Telford is Muslim. What do you think it's like in the towns and cities where 30% are Muslim, like Luton or Bradford? Do you understand why the in-depth report that was given on Rotherham, families and mothers have been trying to get one in Keighley and Bradford for the last 10 years, but they're getting refused. Do you know why they're getting refused? Because if you understood the true scale of this problem, the real number of victims, how many rapes there are, that's what they're hiding. I generally believe that Telford and Rotherham have been used as scapegoat towns and cities to hide the reality. Yeah, 1,400 is bad. 40,000 is a lot worse. You start getting the numbers in those towns and cities. You start hearing the stories from those cities.
A loathsome, obnoxious, repellent individual.
Today we have learned that yesterday the violent racist thug and fraudster known as Stephen Yatsley Lennon, or Tommy Robinson, was invited onto the estate and wined and dined in the House of Lords yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I understand that sometimes we have to engage in views that one might not agree with, but surely the fact that a man who is as guilty as he is on stirring up racial hatred, organising violent, thuggish crimes around the country, setting up the EDL and everything that comes with it, crosses a line. And such a person shouldn't be invited to walk amongst us on the parliamentary estate.
I share his assessment of the individual concerned. A loathsome, obnoxious, repellent individual. And I make no bones about my view being the same as his on that front.
The double standards here are simply amazing. Known terrorist organisations are welcomed into Parliament, and the Speaker, he says nothing. Now we deal with Tommy's criminal convictions and his relationship with the state.